What about breakfast?
We've already had it.
We've had one, yes. What about second breakfast?
I don't think I've ever read a novel that focuses so much on food. In The Lord of the Rings, and I'm dead serious about this, at every turn, these characters are eating, talking about food, being disgusted by what others are eating, snacking on lembas, drinking water that acts like food. It's one of the most prominent features of these books. And this isn't a joke essay or anything like that, because if you read other novels, there might be like 1 or 2 times when they actually eat food or main character kind of sits down and eats a meal, but it's rarely ever in them. Think of some of the other popular works of fiction or fantasy. Like in Brandon Sanderson's work, there's a lot of action and fast-paced writing, but it's not a lot of like meals. There's not a lot of eating. Even when they do sit down to plan, there's no eating in those planning sessions. Rowling does incorporate a fair amount of eating in her work, but often that feels a bit more like a quick meal in passing so that the character can kind of get to go where they need to go. And it kind of seems like they're in a rush. And it's mainly in there for sensory detail. It doesn't seem as like seamless as it does in Lord of the Rings. In some of the more like, these more serious novels out there that people talk about, like fiction, not really fantasy, there's a serious lack of eating in most of them. Some of my favorite novels of all time, there's just a lack of like food. And it's always been a pet peeve of mine too. Characters in these stories rarely ever eat. They rarely ever sleep. And it makes it weirdly unrealistic for me. But not only does Tolkien incorporate eating in his narratives, it's almost in every single chapter, to be honest. And the times that the characters have longer meals together are the times when there is a massive information dump. And rarely do 2 or more characters sit and have a dialogue or discussion in the work of Tolkien without eating food, or at the very least mentioning how there is a lack of food. And this is, strange enough, something that gives a significant amount of depth to his characters. And I think it's easy to gloss over that. But for those of you who don't know, I am reading Lord of the Rings for the first time in my life, and I'm publishing video essays as I read it. I am on the Flotsam and Jetsam chapter, which was incredible, by the way. One of my favorites of the entire book so far. And I am planning to read through the entire Legendarium and eventually write and publish a ton of essays about that work as well. So make sure you subscribe. Like the video as well. And in the comments, tell me about maybe like the most memorable meal that you've ever eaten in your life. I could tell a story about that one. I actually have something in the top of my head for the most memorable meal I've ever eaten in my life. Because in normal everyday life, we as human beings seem to center our whole existence around eating and around meals. I mean, other than the obvious that it keeps us alive, there's a meal around every holiday where it's the focal point. When you go on a date, you generally go grab food and, talk together. Even when I have friends over and we just watch a movie or something, we always need a good snack. Food is an integral part of our everyday lives, and it's just so absent in so many novels and stories. Those tend to want to attempt to focus on the more, realistic parts of life and the more serious and action-packed parts. But then those novels also tend to lose me because the main character hasn't eaten for days. They haven't shared a meal or talked to any other character while snacking, and it's just so subliminal that for some reason I think it actually takes the reader out of the story without them even realizing it. But I think Tolkien is different, as I'm coming to learn and say in pretty much every one of my essays. From his time with the Inklings, I'm pretty sure they shared a meal together all the time to talk about literature and writing. And so that very idea is incorporated around every single chapter that Tolkien writes. Think through this with me for the whole series so far. And in the comments, let me know too what I'm leaving out, because this is I'm going off the top of my head for what meals are actually mentioned in the books. And I guarantee you I'm going to miss a few. But let's go from the beginning. You have Bilbo's celebration feast in like the first chapter. In the second chapter, you have Frodo's feast after Bilbo left. You also have his feast after every year commemorating Bilbo's disappearance. When Gandalf comes back, him and Frodo share a meal. The meal that they shared when Frodo moved and went to his new house. The meal that they had at Tom Bombadil's. The meal that they had with Gildor. The meal that they had at the Prancing Pony and at Farmer Maggot's. I forgot that one. The short meals they had around when Frodo was turning into a wraith on the way to Rivendell. Even when he's turning into a wraith, they still stop and have a good meal and chat together. They had one after the Council of Elrond. They had a massive feast. And even like the whole way south and in Moria, that was like very action-packed. There were scarce mentions of food, but it was still there. There were mentions of it. Then they get to Lothlorien and they have a feast. And then down when they're going to the river, they eat lembas bread when the hobbits are snatched up by the orcs. They're starving but don't want to eat the meat that the orcs are eating. It's mentioned everywhere. Théoden, even directly after he's freed from Grima, goes to have a meal. And I noted this in another video essay, but the chapter before this, like all these chapters are so interesting to me because it was the first time I actually felt hunger for these characters. Because so often we are sitting there having a meal, or at least talking about having a meal. And the few chapters that we rarely get when they are marching to war and they don't have a ton of food before them, I felt the agony and the pain and the hunger that those characters felt, which is what I think Tolkien was trying to get at, to make us feel hungry along with the characters. I remember even on the chase with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, when they're chasing Merry and Pippin. And those chapters, it didn't really not mention that they ate. They did eat a little bit, but it kind of mentioned that they were exhausted and they were really thinking about food. Like they were very hungry. And Tolkien, I think, knows this very well. Like himself being in war and marching and likely knowing all too well the feeling of being hungry. I think it comes very prominently in his work. And I think when you're on a journey like this, it's shocking how much food takes up space in your brain. And it's an interesting idea as well because it's kind of all you think about. But most novelists barely mention it, which again, maybe this is because Tolkien has been in war and he actually knows what it's like to experience hunger. And maybe a lot of novelists today don't really know what that feeling is like. You have your meals in front of you at all times. You're never really without need. You never really feel hunger in any significant way because they only kind of mention it in a theoretical way. Like how a character, after doing something for a long time, just ached and was very hungry. But the lack of specificity in the whole journey just feels unrealistic to me. And I'm going to compare it real quick with something that Brandon Sanderson did, which I still love Brandon Sanderson. I think he's he's just a different writer than Tolkien. I think this is like a pretty poor comparison to make because Tolkien is, the god of writing. Brandon Sanderson is a good storyteller, I think. So I'm going to harp on Brandon Sanderson for 1 second. I still remember there was one section in the book when one of his characters they were doing something called pewter burning, which is, and I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty, but they essentially had to run for hundreds of miles. Like they had a special power, they had to run hundreds of miles. And there was nothing in there about they were super hungry after and, they ate a meal really quick after, but there was no serious sensory details that made you feel hungry along with the character and made you ache along with that character. I still remember finishing that chapter and being it didn't quite capture how hungry or how tired that character really was. I got a mention of it obviously in the words that I read, but there was nothing that associated that with the reader or with me who was reading it. So it kind of took me out of that. For Tolkien here, it's totally different because everything is centered around meals. So when he misses a chapter that doesn't have a ton of meals in it, I feel super hungry when I'm reading it and I don't know why. I mean, I can remember I went backpacking for the first time in my life with a few buddies 15 years ago. And we went across the border into Canada and did a full week of canoeing and portaging in the Canadian Lakes region in Algonquin, which is absolutely beautiful, by the way. I highly recommend it. While we were there, a lot of us were inexperienced, and we were going around 70 to 80 miles that whole entire week, and we just didn't pack enough food. So we had to ration pretty early on. And I cannot tell you how often we talked about food while we were canoeing or just walking around and sitting around at camp. It was honestly the focal point of every single conversation that we had. And this is something that actually makes journeys lovely, in that when you make food, it takes a little bit longer to make when you're out in the bush. So you just kind of sit around a fire talking and swapping stories and the food comes. And for that reason, the food just makes things lighter and more casual and laid back. And the whole entire thing is centered around the food and just having a good time together. And again, I think Tolkien writes like someone who knows the central focal point of food in the life of a person. There are so many meals in this chapter. And we just came up to one of my favorites of all time in the Flotsam and Jetsam chapter. And the details in the book are like these fantastic specifics of what they're eating, and the pipeweed, and the fact that Gandalf left and went to go find Treebeard, and Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli all stayed back to spend time with the hobbits. I think this humanizes the characters so much. I'm not kidding. I love Aragorn. He's honestly so great in the books, but in the movie I find him difficult sometimes because he just seems so otherworldly. Like, you know, he loves the hobbits and the rest of the Fellowship and all, but he just seems above it at the same time. And in the book, he actually has a starker contrast, which points to his humility and is also a huge reason for why he would actually be an amazing king. And this whole essay is kind of leading to this one point because it's leading to my renewed love of Aragorn and why I actually find him such a phenomenal character. Because this meal made him human. Because he's significantly more kingly in the book. But at the same time, while he does kind of like hover an inch above the ground and every character that meets him is in like awe of this kingly disposition that he has, he doesn't skirt his friends. He actually does the opposite. In the beginning, this chapter says this: Gandalf and the king's company rode away, turning eastward to make the circuit of the ruined walls of Isengard. But Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas remained behind, leaving Arad and Hasafel to stray in search of grass. They came and sat beside the hobbits. Well, the hunt is over, and we meet again at last, where none of us ever thought to come, said Aragorn. Now, Aragorn should be with Theoden, Gandalf, and the Kingsguard. But him taking the time to be with friends rather than plan and gain information is significant in that his character is one in the books that he would rather be sharing a meal and catching up with old friends. It makes his entire mission, which was saving Merry and Pippin, to be prominent in the books because he doesn't just smile and ride by when they see Merry and Pippin like in the movie, but he takes the time to learn their story. It's actually like he values these hobbits and is coming to love them. And I just loved his humility here to stay with these hobbits rather than do business with the Ents and Theoden and his guard. And the book doesn't just have them sitting on the stone and catching up. The book rarely does that, to be honest. Rather, look how fast the conversation turns to food. And now that the Great Ones have gone to discuss high matters, said Legolas, the hunters can perhaps learn the answers to their own small riddles. We tracked you as far as the forest, but there are still many things I should like to know the truth of. And there is a great deal, too, that we want to know about you, said Merry. We have learned a few things through Treebeard, the old Ent, but that is not nearly enough. All in good time, said Legolas. We were the hunters, and you should give an account of yourselves to us first. Or second, said Gimli. It would go better after a meal. I have a sore head, and it is past midday. You truants might make amends by finding us some of the plunder that you spoke of. Food and drink would pay off some of my score against you. Then you shall have it, said Pippin. Will you have it here or in more comfort in what's left of Saruman's guardhouse, over there under the arch? We had to picnic out here, so as to keep an eye on the road. Less than an eye, said Gimli. But I will not go into any orc house, nor touch orc meat or anything that they have mauled. We wouldn't ask you to, said Merry. We had enough of the orcs ourselves to last a lifetime. But there were many other folk in Isengard. Saruman kept enough wisdom not to trust his orcs. He had men to guard his gates. Some of the most faithful servants, I suppose. Anyway, they were favored and got good provisions. And pipeweed? Asked Gimli. No, I don't think so, Merry laughed. But then, that is another story, which can wait until after lunch. Well, let us go and have lunch then, said the dwarf. Which, the pipeweed discussion will be another essay because that was wild and I have theories on that, all pertaining to what everyone is talking about with the end chapter. I don't really know what that last chapter is that everyone mentions, but I feel like it has to relate to this pipeweed discussion. And as a side note, I want to read another passage and just get your take on what this is, because this is something that actually confused me. It might just be the simplest explanation ever, but for some reason, I just kept getting confused by this. So please let me know what this actually is. This is the line. It says, storerooms in there and above the floods, luckily, said Pippin, as they came back laden with dishes, bowls, cups, knives, and food of various sorts. And you need not turn up your nose at the provender, Master Gimli, said Merry. This is not orc stuff, but man food, as Treebeard calls it. Will you have wine or beer? There's a barrel inside there, very passable. And this is first-rate salted pork. Or I can cut you some rashers of bacon and broil them, if you like. I am sorry there is no green stuff. The deliveries have been rather interrupted in the last few days. I cannot offer you anything to follow but butter and honey for your bread. Are you content? What is this green stuff? Is he literally talking about vegetables? Is there another green stuff for food that I missed somewhere previously in the book? Please let me know in the comments what I missed here. But anyway, look at the first bit of detail that Tolkien is including in here. It's all sensory detail. I am just so hungry sitting here reading that, and it puts me directly into the story because my mouth is watering just thinking about all the delicious food. And then second, these characters are so realistic. They finish a battle, end their travels, and before they can really even sit down to talk, they need to get some food into their system. This just makes Tolkien's characters so much more realistic in my opinion, and relatable. I don't know what it is exactly about that. I mean, maybe there's just not a ton of pride you can hold on when you're stuffing your full face of food, but I just keep thinking of Aragorn leaning back in his chair looking content, eating all this food and smoking his pipe and listening intently to the hobbits here. I think previously I've really noticed the significant difference between Aragorn in the book versus the movie. And when we first met him in the Prancing Pony, I really liked him because he was awkward, and then he just kind of grew a bit distant for me because he was so kingly and noble that he almost felt untouchable. But this moment right here is maybe the return to why I love him, and I'm having my fires rekindled of my love for him. Because in his heart, Aragorn is just a man who wants to have friends. He is sick of the lonely life he lived as a ranger. And I kept thinking back to that line when they first shared a meal together, when he said to the hobbits in the Prancing Pony that a hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. This passage right here is the fulfillment of that pseudo-prophecy. And I think, for perhaps the first time in a really long time, Aragorn is content and happy with these friends, around this table, eating good food, listening to good tales. No duty in the whole world could pull him away from this. And it really makes me admire him all the more. And I think this whole essay is about food, but it's really about my rekindled love of Aragorn. In this one single moment, he became one of my favorite characters. It's funny how like all these characters kind of just push and pull on my who my favorite is and who isn't. But this moment kind of just like knocked my guard off a little bit. Aragorn has always been this kingly figure, and I've respected him for that. But this is the moment that he just seems like he'd be a perfect king, because he's humble, and he would rather spend time with friends and hobbits than he would go deal with war and go deal with the planning of things and go get information. So fantastic. And then I kind of want to do a secondary essay within this essay, because this is just something I want to mention quickly that I might mention when the pipeweed essay comes out later, because I really do want to do an essay on that one. But I just love this moment so much. It was one of my favorites in the chapter, and I just want to essentially just gush on this for like a half second before the essay ends. It's Gimli looking for a pipe and then Pippin supplying him on it. I think it's just a truly beautiful moment that I loved in this chapter, but I just want to read it for you. The book says this: "It is good," said Merry. "My dear Gimli, it is Longbottom Leaf. There were the hornblower's brand marks on the barrels, as plain. How it came here, I can't imagine. For Saruman's private use, I fancy. I never knew that it went so far abroad, but it comes in handy now." "It would," said Gimli, "if I had a pipe to go with it. Alas, I lost mine in Moriar before. Is there no pipe in all your plunder?" "No, I'm afraid not," said Merry. "We have not found any, nor even here in the guard rooms. Saruman kept this dainty to himself, it seems, and I don't think it would be any use knocking on the doors of Orthanc to beg a pipe of him. We shall have to share pipes, as good friends must at a pinch." "Half a moment," said Pippin, putting his hand inside the breast of his jacket. He pulled out a little soft wallet on a string. "I keep a treasure or two near my skin, as precious as rings to me. Here's one, my old wood pipe. Here's another, an unused one. I have carried it a long way, though I don't know why. I never really expected to find any pipeweed on the journey, when my own ran out. But now, it comes in useful after that. He held up a small pipe with a wide, flattened bowl, then handed it to Gimli. Does that settle the score between us? He said. Settle it, cried Gimli. Most noble Hamlet, it leaves me deep in your debt. Well, I am going back to into the open air to see what the wind and the sky are doing, said Legolas. We will come with you, said Aragorn. They went out and seated themselves upon the stone pillars before the gateway. They could see, far down into the valley, the mists were lifting and floating away upon the breeze. I just wanted to say I love that. It's all I wanted to say. Maybe I'll talk about that more when we get to the weed that Saruman has been buying from the freaking hornblowers of the Shire. Anyway, subscribe, like the video, become a member, and I'll see you in the next one.